And so whatever my mom did, I don't know if she threatened him or what.
He said that she did.
Yeah, he was just a different man.
Wait, he said? Did he say that?
He said, I'm scared for my life. Doug might come after me. And then he said, which we were kind of like, is he just saying things? This is a weird thing to say. Wow. And then he said, if there's any drama, I'm just going to resign.
Yeah.
A board member weeps on the phone. He says he has been waiting for that call his entire life. He says a dying woman told him directly to give her son back what was his. And then, 2 days after the funeral, he sends a text saying none of it ever happened. Now, a leaked written statement has surfaced. Tom Calender, the sole remaining outside board member of Daystar Television Network, is going on record, denying that Joni Lamb ever told him Jonathan should lead or be given Daystar. This is the Daystar succession scandal, the Tom Calender flip, the leaked denial, and everything the documented record tells us that a simple statement cannot erase. Stay with us, because the details matter enormously here, and we are going to walk through all of them. Before we go any further, an important note. This video presents publicly available information, documented reporting by journalist Julie Roys and the Roys Report, recorded audio of the November 2023 Daystar board meeting, statements made directly by Jonathan and Susie Lamb in multiple on-camera interviews, and Tom Calender's own written denial, which has now entered the public record. We are not a court of law. We do not pretend to know what was said in every private room. We are going to present what is documented, flag what is disputed, and let you weigh the evidence for yourself. That is the standard. We hold to it throughout this video. To understand why Tom Calender's leaked statement matters so much, you have to understand what came before it. Daystar Television Network was built from the ground up by Marcus Lamb and his wife Joni Lamb, starting in 1993, with a single Christian television station in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Marcus Lamb, who served as founder, president, and CEO of Daystar, passed away on November 30th, 2021. He left behind a ministry that had grown into one of the largest Christian broadcast networks in the world, reaching more than 100 million homes in the United States and broadcasting internationally. Marcus and Joni had 3 children. One of them, Jonathan Lamb, had served as vice president of the worldwide network, and according to Jonathan, his father had made his intentions clear. There was a succession plan, documented in email form, that named Joni as president following Marcus's death, with Jonathan as the designated successor after her. Tom Calender, who had been a close friend of the Lamb family and a longtime board member, was present for those conversations. Jonathan told the Roys Report that Calender personally pointed to that succession email during a day-long meeting in August 2023 at Calender's home in Montgomery, Alabama. According to Jonathan, Calender looked him in the eye and said, "I am Marcus's dying breath. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure this comes to pass." Those words, Jonathan says, were spoken with conviction. He and Susie left that house believing they had an ally. The next morning, everything changed. According to both Jonathan and Susie Lamb, who have told this account consistently across multiple recorded interviews and podcasts, Tom Calender received a phone call from Joni that night. The morning after their day-long meeting in Montgomery, Calender told them he needed to meet again. What followed shocked them. The man who had declared himself Marcus's dying breath had, overnight, reversed his position completely. He told them they needed to accept Johnny's marriage to Doug Weiss, and that if they could not do so, they would have to leave. Susie Lamb described her reaction bluntly in one interview. She said she checked out at that moment. She was, in her words, done. Jonathan, by his own account, kept hoping longer. But the pattern had been established, and it would define what came next. For context on why the marriage to Doug Weiss was the central flashpoint in all of this, it is important to understand the timeline. Marcus Lamb died in November 2021. Joni subsequently married Doug Weiss, a marriage that Jonathan and Susie, and others close to the family, described as happening relatively quickly. Weiss had divorced his wife of 30 years prior to the marriage. Jonathan and Susie believed that Weiss did not have what they considered biblical grounds for that divorce, and they refused to publicly endorse or celebrate the union. That refusal became the trigger for everything that followed. In July 2023, according to reporting by the Roys Report, Joni and her ally, Pastor Jimmy Evans, held a meeting with Jonathan and Susie, in which the couple were reportedly told over 100 times to submit to Joni's authority regarding the marriage. Susie was fired from Daystar shortly after. Jonathan had his salary cut, was stripped of his executive role, had a GPS tracker placed in his company vehicle, a purchase confirmed by Shannon Kelly's own expense report, which Jonathan provided to journalist Julie Roys, and was eventually followed by a private investigator on local streets with his children in the car. His termination letter was hand-delivered to his home by a Daystar security chief carrying a gun and wearing a bulletproof vest. All of this is not background noise. It is the documented environment in which Tom Calender was operating as a board member throughout this entire saga. On November 16, 2023, a board meeting took place at Daystar. The board at the time consisted of Joni Lamb, Jonathan Lamb, and Tom Calender. CFO Arnold Torres was present and was voted onto the board during the meeting. Jonathan recorded the meeting and provided that recording to the Roys report, which has since made it publicly available. That recording is not disputed. In that meeting, according to the audio and reporting, Calender stated plainly that he had not signed the previous succession plan naming Jonathan as Joni's successor as president, and that therefore, quote, "That's not in effect at all." That was a formal, on-record reversal of the succession picture Jonathan says his father had always intended. The meeting then devolved into hours of pressure from Calender, Joni, Torres, and Daystar's attorney John Lynch for Jonathan to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Lynch told Jonathan on the recording that everything he had said in the room constituted insubordination and could be grounds for termination. Calender told Jonathan that if he did not sign, he was effectively removing himself from the board and from his vice president position. Jonathan refused to sign. He was ultimately fired the following year, on November 16, 2024. That board meeting recording is a documented data point about Tom Calender's behavior. It shows a man who, in a formal board setting, denied the legal validity of a succession plan that Jonathan says Calender had personally sworn to uphold just months earlier. Whether you believe Calender changed his mind organically or under pressure, the reversal is on tape. Now we arrive at the most recent and most explosive sequence of events. Joni Lamb died in May 2026 after a battle with breast cancer that had metastasized into her bones. According to reporting by Julie Roys and the Roys Report, Joni spent her final days in Mexico at a facility called Oasis of Hope, away from her children. Jonathan had no knowledge that his mother was near death before she passed. He learned of her death approximately 10 minutes before Daystar announced it publicly on social media. He was not permitted on the family stage at her funeral, and according to an interview broadcast by the Roys Report, the memorial slideshow shown at the service contained no photographs of Jonathan and Susie. In the days between Joni's death and her funeral, a woman who has been identified in reporting only by a pseudonym, Sally, in some accounts, reached out to Tom Calender with a purpose. This woman, whose identity was verified by Julie Roys, but who spoke anonymously out of fear of professional repercussions, told Roys that she had spent 2 hours with Jonathan and Susie following Joni's death. During that meeting, she said, Jonathan and Susie expressed genuine willingness to reconcile with their sisters, Rachel and Rebecca. The woman said she felt called by God to orchestrate a private meeting between the siblings before the funeral. She called Tom Calender, and what happened on that call, according to her recorded testimony on the Roys Report podcast, was extraordinary. She said that when she told Calender Jonathan wanted to reconcile, the man broke down completely. She described him weeping, saying, quote, "Oh my God, I have been waiting for this phone call. I have been waiting for this phone call." And then, she said, he told her what Joni had said to him directly in a private meeting that took place approximately 3 weeks before Joni's death. According to this woman's testimony, Calender told her that Joni said, and this is her direct quote of his words, "If Jonathan tries to reach out, give him back Daystar." That was the claim. Calender told her he needed to make some calls and would get back to her. She immediately phoned Jonathan and Susie. By her account, Jonathan was overwhelmed. He had not been able to see his mother before she died. He had not been able to say goodbye. And now this woman was telling him that his mother's dying wish had been that he come home. Calender subsequently reached out to Jonathan directly, the first direct contact in a very long time. He also spoke with Susie, and by Susie's account, described in detail to the Roys Report, Tom was warm and effusive on that call. She said he told her he could not wait to wrap his arms around her. She said that when she asked him about the meeting with Joni, he confirmed it happened, said it had lasted about 30 minutes, that Joni was sitting up in her makeup chair throughout, clearly in great pain, and told Susie he would share all the details later. What the Roys Report also documented is a timeline around the conversations with Rachel and Rebecca, Jonathan's sisters. According to this anonymous woman's testimony, Calender called her back roughly 2 hours after his initial call and told her that Rachel and Rebecca were not ready to meet before the funeral. Something had shifted, and then 2 days after the funeral, on May 20th at 11:39 in the morning, Calender sent a text to this woman that said, quote, "Please correct your statement immediately that you spoke to the head of the board and that I said anything to you about what Joni's last wishes were. I did not share any such statement with you." The woman, by all accounts, was stunned. She sent back a response with question marks. Calender held his position. Just like that, everything had been retracted. Now we come to the leaked statement itself. This statement was sent by Tom Calender directly to Jonathan Lamb and has since been made public. We are going to read it in full because the specificity of its language matters. The statement reads, "I'm reaching out to address false statements currently being circulated online by you and others. Just so we're all clear, claims that I somehow said to Mary Colbert that Joni told me that she desired for you to become the head of Daystar or to give you Daystar prior to her passing are completely false and made up. To the contrary, Joni made it clear to me and the board that you were never to have a leadership role at Daystar. In fact, you and I have discussed this very thing previously. Separate from that, you know that Joni made multiple sincere efforts to reach out to you in a spirit of reconciliation. You rejected those efforts. Period. That is the complete statement. Now let us examine what it actually says, and critically, what it does not say. The first thing to observe is the narrowness of the denial itself. Calender's statement denies specifically that he told the anonymous source, whom he names as Mary Colbert, that Joni said she desired Jonathan to become head of Daystar or to receive Daystar prior to her passing. That is the thing being denied. The statement does not deny that Calender wept on the phone call. It does not deny that he reached out to Jonathan directly after that call. It does not deny that he told Susie he could not wait to wrap his arms around her. It does not deny that he confirmed meeting with Joni in her final weeks. It does not deny that during the call he said he had been waiting to hear from Jonathan. All of those elements, documented across Jonathan and Susie's own accounts and the Roys report's reporting, remain uncontested by Calender's denial. The denial is not wide. It is very, very narrow, and the narrowness of a denial is always worth examining. The second thing to notice is the counterclaim embedded in the denial. Calender does not simply say he did not make the statement attributed to him. He goes further. He says, Joni made it clear to him and to the board that Jonathan was, in his words, never to have a leadership role at Daystar. If that is true, it is a significant counter-narrative, but it raises an immediate question that the statement does not answer. When did Joni make that clear? Was it before or after the escalating pressure campaign against Jonathan and Susie that began in July 2023? Was it before or after the November 2023 board meeting in which Calender declared the succession plan not in effect? Was it before or after the accounts of Calender completely reversing his position overnight following a phone call from Joni in August 2023? The timing question is not incidental. In any accountability context, it is central. If Calender is telling the truth and Joni always wanted Jonathan excluded, then the succession plan Lamb documented, the plan Calender himself cited as the reason he was still alive, needs to be directly explained. The third thing to observe, and this is where fairness requires we give Calender his due, is the reconciliation allegation. The statement says Joni made multiple sincere efforts to reach out to Jonathan in a spirit of reconciliation, and that Jonathan rejected those efforts. That is a serious claim. Jonathan Lamb has not, at the time of this recording, publicly addressed that specific allegation in direct terms. If true, it adds a layer of complexity to the picture of Jonathan as a grieving, wronged son, desperately seeking connection with his dying mother. If false, it is an extraordinary thing to put in writing in a formal statement about a man who has just buried his mother. We note it, we flag it, and we do not resolve it. That is what the public record currently allows us to do. What makes Tom Calender's denial so difficult to evaluate in isolation is that it does not exist in isolation. There is a documented pattern here, and it spans years. In August 2023, Jonathan and Susie described Calender as fully aligned with their concerns during an all-day meeting. Overnight, after a phone call from Joni, he reversed completely. He told them, by their account, that he was scared for his life and that Doug might come after him. Then, in the November 2023 board meeting, on audio that is now part of the public record, Calender sat at that table and told Jonathan that the succession plan his father had documented was not in effect because Calender had never signed it. He told Jonathan to sign an NDA or lose his position. He helped orchestrate the professional dismantling of a man he had months earlier sworn to protect. And now, in 2026, following a phone call in which a credible witness says he wept and confirmed Joni's dying wish, Calender has sent a text denying the call ever included any such statement, followed by a formal written denial to Jonathan himself. The question that accountability journalism is obligated to ask is this: what is the consistent direction of these reversals, and whose interests do they serve each time? Every documented shift in Calender's position has moved in one direction, away from Jonathan, and away from the succession plan Lamb is documented to have wanted. And every one of those shifts has aligned with the institutional interests of whoever held power at Daystar at the time. That is not proof of anything on its own, but it is a pattern, and patterns in documented public records are not nothing. There are two honest ways to understand Tom Calender's behavior across this entire story. The first framework is Jonathan and Susie's framework, that Calender is a man who privately held views consistent with Lamb's succession wishes and Jonathan's rightful place at Daystar, but who has been pressured repeatedly by Joni and by institutional forces to reverse, deny, and protect the current power structure at Daystar, even at the cost of his own stated convictions. Under this framework, the weeping phone call was real. What he told the anonymous source was true. And what changed between that call and his written denial was a conversation with Jonathan's sisters, who have reportedly controlled much of what happens at Daystar since their mother's death. The second framework is Tom Calender's framework, as expressed in his own statement, that the phone call was mischaracterized or misunderstood, that he never said what the anonymous woman claims he said, that Joni's consistent and clearly stated position was always that Jonathan had no place in Daystar's leadership, and that Jonathan Lamb has spent months constructing a narrative around a foundation that simply does not exist. Under this framework, Jonathan is a grieving and perhaps wishful son who heard what he wanted to hear from a third party and has built a public campaign around it. We cannot tell you with certainty which of those frameworks is correct. No one outside that private room can. What we can tell you is this: the corroboration around the anonymous source's account, Calendar reaching out to Jonathan directly afterward, the warm call with Susie, his description of stress being lifted, his confirmation that the meeting with Joni happened, is not nothing. Those elements lend credibility to the substance of what she reported. They do not prove the specific words Joni allegedly used, but they do make a clean, flat denial difficult to accept without serious scrutiny. The public record in this story now contains a remarkable number of primary documents and first-person accounts. It contains the succession plan email Marcus Lamb sent, naming Jonathan as his intended successor. It contains Jonathan and Susie's own testimony across multiple recorded interviews, which has been consistent across every retelling. It contains the audio of the November 2023 Daystar board meeting, in which Tom Calender declared the succession plan void and demanded Jonathan sign an NDA. It contains expense report documentation showing when GPS trackers were purchased for Daystar vehicles. It contains footage of a private investigator following Jonathan and his family and being confronted on camera. It contains Tom Calender's own text message, dated 2 days after the funeral, categorically denying that any statement about Joni's wishes was ever made. It contains a recorded interview with an anonymous but verified family friend who describes Calender weeping on the phone and relaying Joni's specific words. It contains Jonathan Lamb's own formal written statement saying that his mother's dying wish aligns with what his father communicated in his documented succession plan, and that both of his parents, in their final days, pointed in the same direction. And it now contains Tom Calender's leaked written denial, sent directly to Jonathan, which has since been made public. All of that is in the record. None of it cancels the rest out. The totality of the record is what accountability requires us to weigh. Jonathan Lamb, in his formal statement following the publication of the anonymous source's account on the Roys report, expressed hope that Daystar's board would honor what both of his parents had asked for. He said he was ready to serve. He described the news about Joni's dying wish as both healing and deeply confirming, saying it brought him a peace he did not expect to feel so soon after her death. Whether Jonathan Lamb ever leads Daystar Television Network, the ministry his father founded, built from a single station in Dallas-Fort Worth into one of the largest Christian broadcast networks on earth, remains an open question. The board of Daystar has not made any public statement about succession or leadership plans in response to this story. Calender's denial draws a firm line. Jonathan's statement draws a firm line in the opposite direction, and the documented record sits in the space between those two lines, asking questions that have not yet been answered. What we know with certainty is that Daystar Television Network, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that has asked millions of believers to trust it with their donations and their faith, is operating right now with enormous questions about its leadership, its governance, its accountability structures, and whether the wishes of both of its founders are being honored or buried. Those are not small questions. They are the questions that every stakeholder in any ministry ought to be able to demand answers to without fear of retaliation. The Daystar story is far from over. Tom Calender's leaked denial is now part of the permanent record. So is the testimony of the anonymous source. So is the recorded November 2023 board meeting. So is the GPS tracking, the private investigator, the NDA coercion, the succession plan email, and the text message that said none of it ever happened. And if there are further developments, whether the board responds publicly, whether Tom Calender says anything more, whether Jonathan Lamb makes additional moves, whether independent voices within the Christian community speak out about the direction Daystar is heading, this channel will cover it honestly and thoroughly, the way accountability journalism is supposed to work. If this video helped you understand the story more completely, please hit the subscribe button. Share this with someone following the Daystar situation. And if you have documented information relevant to this story, we want to hear from you. Not rumors, not speculation, documentation. That is what moves the needle. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next one.